Welcome to the All Pro Football Show. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode, we're talking about the top 10 linebackers in the 2024 NFL Draft Class based on data. So we're going to be looking at production, athleticism, and other statistical factors to determine who the top 10 linebackers are from a data perspective. So one little disclaimer. So before we get into the full video, understand that data is not an exact science. So just because a prospect is the best linebacker based on data does not mean that that linebacker is going to go on to become the best linebacker in the class. It increases their chances for success at the NFL level, but you do have to kind of add the film with all the other aspects of evaluation to get to who those best linebackers are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nuances in this video, but stay tuned until the end of the video where I show you who the top linebacker is based on data. I'm going to follow that stuff out of the way. Let's get to the prospects. So first off, before we get into it, let's talk about how I evaluated these players. So I looked at defensive market share data, which you can kind of learn about my process on this picture right here. We looked at mass density athleticism traits, which is athleticism based on their size and their weight, their weight and their height. And then, of course, we looked at adjusted production scores, which is the contextual production, production based on their age, how productive they were for the level of competition that they faced, and of course, how productive they were for the team that they were on. Because it does tell you something when a prospect plays at, say, Alabama or a big-time college program, and they were really productive. It tells you something about that prospect that makes them different from other prospects in the class. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to number 10 on this list, which is Tyrone Hooper, or Hopper, from Missouri. Pros, he had above average production traits and above average athleticism. Cons, below average flexibility and does not have elite production overall. His data grade is 83.40 out of 100. Taking a look at his production traits overall, 80 percentile in terms of solo tackle and tackle for loss data, with below average sack market share. Sack market share isn't the most important thing for pursuit or off-ball linebackers, but tackles and tackles for loss are, and he did well in those particular categories. Taking a look at his other market share scores, such as forced fumbles, pass deflections, interceptions, he did well in those areas too. And then, of course, we get to athleticism traits, above average explosiveness, above average speed, with below average flexibility. He's closer to a starter than an all-pro or Pro Bowl player, but this is good traits for him overall. Then, of course, we look at adjusted production traits, did well here, too, in terms of his overall production for his age and everything else like that. I would project him as a starter at the next level, but not necessarily an elite starter. So, of course, we get to number 9 on this list, and this is the first surprise, because I know a lot of people have Peyton Wilson as the top linebacker in this particular draft class, but why does the data hate him so much? Well, it comes down to his age. He has a 5.26 out of 100 age score, which is something that most all-pro linebackers, actually all all-pro linebackers in my scoring system, which goes back to 1989, there's never been a multiple all-pro player at the linebacker position who was that old coming out. And there are some reasons for it, but the reasons are kind of character related a little bit. But, again, I will tell you this, though. There are a lot of positives of Peyton Wilson. First off, elite production overall, elite explosiveness / speed. So let's just take a look at his data real quick. So taking a look at his production traits. Elite. He has elite production traits. So you could project him as an all-pro potential player based on his overall market share production. Same thing goes with his other traits, such as pass deflection market share, interception market share. He would definitely be a pretty decent coverage linebacker based on these traits. And then, of course, when you look at athleticism, below average explosiveness, but he did have above average speed and above average flexibility. The below average explosiveness is a bit of a concern because, again, it takes him out of Pro Bowl and All-Pro level outcomes based on his explosiveness traits. But I think the bigger thing is really his adjusted production. So this is what I'm talking about. Look at the average all-pro players. Look at the Pro Bowl players. Look at the starter players based on their adjusted production. Peyton Wilson's 5.26 age score really hurts his overall projection. So he's a toughie. He's a tough call. If you believe in the film and you believe in his production and all that kind of stuff, you could be getting a linebacker that has a lot of success at the NFL level. At the same time, you might be getting one of the bigger busts in a while based on some of the off-the-field issues with him, his history with different substances, I should say. But we'll see. I do wish him all the best. I think there's a lot of positives to him, but from a data perspective, he's a very risky prospect, but he still is in the top 10. So despite all those issues I just mentioned, he's still in the top 10. So from a data perspective. Then, of course, we get to number 8 on this list, which is Junior Colson. Pros, above average production traits. Cons, did not test and below average production with the exception of his solo tackle market share. Overall data grade is 84.80 out of 100. Taking a look at his production traits, 70 percentile in terms of solo tackle market share, and everything else is just kind of meh. Taking a look at his other production traits, forced fumbles, pass deflections, interception market share, non-existent here for him. And then, of course, when you look at his athleticism traits, based on his projected 40-yard dash, so I don't have an actual 40. I used his projected 40 from NFLDraftScout.com. Essentially, he's like what he might have ran, his potential 40-yard dash, which is in the starter Pro Bowl range. I mean, it's not too surprising to say he would run that fast, especially a highly touted linebacker such as him. But this is where things are, helpful for him. Why he's as high as he is on this list is because of his age. It's because of his MSA rating, his pass rating. In many ways, his age plus his level of competition, which because again he played at Michigan, plus the team that he played on, of course, Michigan. Michigan played a tough schedule, and they're a really good football team, and he was a starter on that team. Those are things that really push his profile up. But again, if you look at his overall data, there's concerns from a market share perspective based on his traits here. So I would say he kind of has a false positive in some ways based on his overall data. But that's just me. That's an anecdotal, data instinct type thing. Then, of course, we get to number 7 on this list, which is Trevine Wallace from Kentucky. He has elite explosiveness and elite speed for his size, inconsistent production traits, and age has not been confirmed, are his biggest cons. Data grade is 85.53 out of 100. Taking a look at his production traits, as you can see here, he did have above average sack market share, but his solo tackle and tackle for loss data was kind of non-existent, kind of closer to like the starter area in terms of Pro Bowl and All-Pro instead of Pro Bowl and All-Pro areas. But of course, when you look at his other production traits, great forced fumble data, great interception data, not so hot in terms of pass deflection market share. Taking a look at athleticism traits, elite athleticism traits overall, did not do flexibility testing, but it is what it is, okay? And then, of course, when you get to his adjusted production traits, all those areas are kind of closer to a starter than anything else in terms of the data. So I like him as a prospect, but the production is concerning. He doesn't have a clean production profile, but he is one of those upside type players. And I think if I actually had an actual age for him, which I don't have yet, if he was younger, I think his data would be better than what it is right here. So I think he would definitely be higher on this list if there was a confirmed age score. Because right now, I just have average age for him based on his projected data, if you will. Then, of course, when you get to number 6 on this list, we have Curtis Jacobs from Penn State. Pros, elite speed and near elite explosiveness. Below average production traits are his biggest cons. Data grade is 86.10 out of 100. Taking a look at his production traits, very similar to Trevine Wallace. When you look at his linebacker or other market share data, not really that great. Taking a look at athleticism, though, elite speed, near elite flexibility, explosiveness for his size, and above average flexibility. These are good numbers to hit. This is kind of what you want a great linebacker to hit in terms of their athletic testing. And then, of course, when you look at his adjusted production traits, pretty much within the starter averages at the position in terms of other places, which is why he is where he's at. Again, overall production, not that great. but did have good athleticism, does have good adjusted production traits. There might be something there with him. So, of course, we get to number 5 in this list, which is Edan Cooper. We finally are in the 90th percentile linebackers, guys. So, based on his data, he had near elite speed, near elite production overall. Cons would be average explosiveness, data grade 90.97 out of 100. If you grade by who hits at least some elite production and elite athleticism traits, Cooper would be linebacker 1 based on data if you cherry pick stats. So, what I mean by that is this, which I know that was kind of a interesting sentence there, but if you just go by linebackers that hit nearly elite production traits, you're just cherry picking those traits, he would be linebacker 1, because a lot of the linebackers that are above him on this list didn't have elite athleticism traits, but they also had better production traits than Edan Cooper in some ways. So I think overall, if you really were just going off of the mindset of like, okay, yes, his data grade was 90.97 out of 100. He didn't have a higher data grade than some of the other linebackers on this list, but I'm trying to get a guy that has the prerequisite traits to be a special player. That's Edan Cooper. His overall, his data in the aggregate is not as good as the linebackers that are above him on this list, but Cooper does have traits, data traits, that would make him the top linebacker in this class in many ways. So let's take a look at what those traits are. So first off, taking a look at his market share data, 87 percentile in terms of sack market share, 91 percentile in terms of tackle for loss, 67 percentile in terms of solo tackle data. A lot of his production is very similar to Fred Warner in terms of his overall data profile, in terms of his overall production. Fred Warner had below average, not really below average, but he had average-ish solo tackle data. But he did have good sack and TFL data. I think that's kind of the best comparison I have for Edan Cooper as a potential Fred Warner candidate. Taking a look at his other market share traits, great forced fumble market share, great pass deflection market share, great interception market share, but these production traits are not as correlative as solo tackles, sacks, tackle for loss, especially solo tackles. Then athleticism-wise, as you can see, average explosiveness, 88 percentile in terms of speed, and 65 percentile in terms of flexibility for his size. These are good numbers to hit for a linebacker, a sort of a run-and-chase type linebacker. But again, there are some concerns based on his solo tackle data. Then, of course, when you get to his adjusted production traits, pretty much hits within the All-Pro, Pro Bowl area. So Cooper does have potential to be a Pro Bowl linebacker at the next level. And again, if you have him at linebacker 1, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's just that based on his aggregated data, he has, he's number 5. He's not number 4, number 3, number 2, number 1 on this list. And there's nothing wrong with that, because as a data analyst, you can't just take every number and boil it down into one thing and then just base everything off of that. You have to look at all the data collectively, individually, and then make a decision based on your knowledge of past performances, past scenarios, based on the data. But overall, that's Edan Cooper. Taking a look at number 4 on this list, we have Tommy Ekenberg from Ohio State. Pros, great production traits overall. Below average athleticism is the biggest con, with a 91.20 production or data grade, I should say. Based on his production traits, as you can see, great solo tackle data, good TFL data, below average sack data, but sack data isn't the most important thing when it comes to pursuit linebackers. Taking a look at his other production traits, he was decent in terms of forced fumbles, pass deflections, and interceptions. Biggest issue, athleticism. Below average athleticism overall. He did hit at least the starter threshold for the position, so this is like the kind of bottom of the barrel potential starter. Will probably have issues at the next level. I mean, it is what it is, but he definitely could go somewhere and become a starter with his athleticism traits, but I think he would be a liability in coverage. Then, of course, when you look at his adjusted production traits, definitely within the starter area of potential in terms of adjusted data. Then we get to number 3 in this list, which is Jaylen Ford from Texas. Pros, a near elite production and above average athleticism. Cons, does not have elite athleticism traits or elite production overall. Data grade is 95.07 out of 100, which is, again, that's the biggest issue with this class. A lot of the really great testing linebackers in this class don't have elite athleticism traits, which again is why Edan Cooper gets pushed up. It's why Peyton Wilson gets pushed up, because you have that issue. You have a lot of linebackers that are really great production-wise, didn't test terrible as athletes, but they just don't have elite athleticism traits. They don't hit 80 percentile, 90 plus percentile areas in terms of their athleticism, so it kind of lowers them a little bit. Doesn't mean that they're going to be terrible players at the NFL level. It's just that they're not going to reach the same heights as other players might hit based on their athletic potential. Then when you look at Jaylen Ford in terms of production, good production traits, as you can see here. Looking at his other production traits, pass deflection market share was about, below average, but everything else was good. The forced fumble market share, interception market share was, very great, actually. And then, of course, when you look at athleticism traits, above average overall, with a great flexibility score, closer to starter average in many ways based on his overall data. Taking a look at adjusted production traits, definitely in the Pro Bowl starter average area based on his adjusted production traits, and that's kind of how I view him. I view him more as a starter than a Pro Bowl All-Pro player, but definitely a guy that could stick around for a long time in the NFL. Then, of course, we get to number 2 on this list, which is Cedric Gray from North Carolina. Pros, elite production traits, elite age score, does not have elite athleticism traits. Data grade is 98.03 out of 100. Taking a look at his production traits, amazing, 98 percentile in terms of most of his production traits here. But of course, you look at his other production traits, forced fumbles, pass deflections, interceptions, all in the 80 to 90 plus percentile in terms of his ability as a producer, as a middle of the field linebacker. He was great in terms of his overall production. And of course, you look at his athleticism traits, which is where things get a little dicey. Above average explosiveness and speed with below average flexibility for his size does hit at least to a point where he could be a starter based on this data. But when I went back and looked at his data, he tested similar to Thomas Davis from Georgia. Of course, Thomas Davis was battling injury at the time when he went through his testing. But Cedric Gray, good data, profile in terms of athleticism traits, but not elite. And that's the biggest thing, is I can't really project him as an all-pro and Pro Bowl linebacker if he doesn't have elite athleticism traits. So that's going to be the biggest knock on him, which is why, again, if you're actually drafting in the NFL draft, you're going to take Edan Cooper. You're going to take Peyton Wilson over Cedric Gray, over Jaylen Ford, because they don't have that upside potential, if you will. But that doesn't discount what Cedric Gray did based on his data, and again, makes him, even though he didn't test well as an athlete, he could become a really great starting NFL linebacker, Then, of course, you look at his adjusted production traits, all fantastic here. Good age score, good pass rating, good MSA rating. All those things are great. Last but not least, we get to the number 1 linebacker in the 2024 NFL draft class based on data, which is Jeremiah Trotter Jr. So the pros, elite production traits and age score. Cons, inconsistent athletic testing. He did the short shuttle and 3-cone at the combine, didn't do a 40-yard dash, didn't do explosion testing, and did not test fully in the process. Data grade would be 98.27 out of 100. So what makes Jeremiah Trotter so special? Production. Look at his solo tackle data. Look at his sack data. Look at his TFL data. All those numbers are amazing, and he did this at Clemson. Then, of course, you look at his other production traits. Great forced fumble, pass deflection, interception data. Did this at Clemson also. Get context. Athleticism. We don't know. We don't know what he would really test like. His speed score is projected based on his potential speed score, and then his flexibility testing is based on his, what he did at the combine. But I think overall, again, no elite athleticism traits to hang your hat on here. So as much as he's really productive, as much as he has great production traits overall, he doesn't quite have the traits to make you go, yes, that's an all-pro player. Yes, that's a Pro Bowl player. He doesn't hit all the numbers that he needs to hit at the position. Then, of course, we get to the last part, which is his adjusted production traits, which are great. His adjusted production, 99 percentile to 98 percentile in terms of every single metric in terms of him. Overall, though, this linebacker class, from a data perspective, is interesting. If I was just instinctually, if I was to like rank the linebackers based on how I do my work, Edan Cooper would be the top linebacker. After that, I would really have a hard time debating whether or not to put Peyton Wilson at number 2 based on his age score. When I took a look at all the linebackers with an age score as old as he is, there was really not that many starters. You know, there was a lot of backups, a lot of reserve types, and these were even high draft prospects. So I worry about that. So as much as he is elite athleticism, he does have question marks. He does have a lot of question marks because of his age score and because of his below average explosiveness is also a concern. But Peyton Wilson probably would be number 2, and then you would have the other linebackers after that, at least the highly tested production ones. But this is again, it's not a perfect class. There's not a Luke Kuechly. There's not a Ray Lewis. There's not, there's not that guy in this particular class that just kind of hits everything. But I do think that Cooper and Peyton Wilson to a certain extent and all these other linebackers I mentioned, I think a lot of them are going to go on to become long-term starters at the NFL level, and I think they'll have success. But this was the top 10 linebackers in the 2024 NFL Draft Class based on data. To learn more about these prospects, please consider buying the 2024 NFL Draft Analytics Guide. It's the 9th annual analytics guide that I've released in my time as a draft analyst, and it is bigger and better than ever. It has 678 pages on the offensive and defensive class with all the data work that I just mentioned, but it has the entire class. So no longer do you have to ask me questions on Twitter or on YouTube about how one player tested or how this other player tested. You can just go buy the guide and know everything that you need to know about this particular draft class. Also, you can become a Patreon at patreon.com/jcoburn, where I will be having updates and different analysis on there, especially post-draft. Definitely consider becoming a Patreon subscriber there post-draft. And then, of course, follow my formerly known as Twitter account on Geometrics. Check out these other videos as well at the end of the video here. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.